Hi everyone, my name's Victoria K. Chapman from Weyakin Designs. I'm an illustrator and author of children's picture books. I am a fine artist and I am an art instructor. I had a friend who's also an illustrator ask me for some advice on framing pieces for showing in a gallery. So I figured I would create this handy video for any of you who might be looking for some advice in this area. I've shown work in a number of shows recently, so I've kind of developed this system now that works pretty well for me. So I'm going to share that with you. So the materials you're going to need to frame your work include obviously the piece. This is the piece I'm framing today. You will need your frame. I picked up this frame that's a 12-inch by 12-inch square frame. You can pick any frame as long as it works well for your sizing needs and the quality is what you were hoping for. Ideally, the frame would be made from wood or some sort of wood composite or softer material that you can screw into. You don't want metal that you can't screw into unless it is designed with holes in it already. You may have to come up with a different system for that. So I would go with wood or something softer that you can put screws into. Then you also have your mat board, which will, nicely mat your piece of art. And then you have your backing board, which is the same size as the outside edges of the mat board. In this case, these are both 12 inches by 12 inches. The interior of this is 9 inches by 9 inches. Then what else you will need includes linen hinging tape. This is to put the pieces of mat board together. Photo corners for putting your work into the matting without actually adding any adhesive to the work itself. And then also your wiring kit. So you'll need your frame wire. Some kits come with these little sort of tubes that you can put over it and squeeze. They're kind of like crimp beads that you can use to hold the wire on. In other cases, it doesn't come with that. You would just twist the wire into place, wrap it around to hold it in place. You have your brackets that will go onto the frame here. And then you, of course, have your screws to attach the brackets to the frame. And you may want a pair of pliers with a cutter or separate pliers and cutter, whatever tools you might have for helping with the wiring process. You'll also need a screwdriver to put the brackets for your wiring on the frame. Make sure it's whatever type of head the screws are for your bracket kit. In my case, I have a Phillips head screwdriver. And then you'll also need a pair of scissors for cutting your hinge mat tape. So you're going to want to create what's called a hinge mat. You'll want to line up the mat board with the backing board like this. So you'll create this hinge on top. So your piece will be sitting in here and you will have this hinge that goes over it. That is the idea. Remove the piece out of the way for now. So you'll get your linen hinge tape. This particular kind I have is by a company called Lineco. They also make the photo corners. They make some nice quality archival materials for your matting purposes. So you'll take your hinge tape, and this has a backing on it that you'll pull off. You will kind of just measure out how long you need this to be. So you don't want it to go over your mat board. You want it to go like just right up to, maybe give yourself a little space right up to the end there. So you will need scissors as well to cut your hinge tape. So measure out here. I'm going to use my thumb to just kind of mark out where I want to cut. And I will cut right there. There we go. All right. So now we will place that on here, make sure it's all lined up and together. So you're gonna peel this off the backing. It'd be a little challenging to get the corner up at first, but peel that off, make sure it doesn't roll up on itself. And very carefully place this so that the joint between the two pieces is approximately in the middle of the tape. And then you want to flatten that down really well so that it adheres nicely and won't come apart. And now you've created your hinge. You see this is kind of attached now. Next, you'll need to center your piece on here. So make sure it's smaller than the width of the backing board, but larger than the width of the opening of the mat board. You want to get that nicely centered there. I kind of did a good guess there on that. So just kind of check and, you know, adjust as needed until you have it in the spot where you want it. Now that I've got that positioned, we're going to grab our photo corners. These come on this kind of little tape, and you can see these little corners are on here, and they just peel right off. These are self-adhesive. You peel off a corner, and it's got this little pocket. You can stick it, hold the piece down with your thumb, pull up the corner, pop the corner on there, whoops, and then press it down onto the backing board. And then we're going to do that with all 4 corners so that your piece is properly seated on the backing board with the photo corners. There you go. You really want to make sure this is in the right place before you push it down onto the backing board, because it's hard to peel these photo corners up without damaging the backing board. It is a pretty good adhesive, which is what you want, but you just need to be careful how you place it. Okay, we've got another photo corner here. Pop that on. All right. And then last one, get that on there. Another important note is before you do this, you really want to make sure your hands are clean. You really don't want to muck up any of this stuff, especially if it's white. I like to use white for my mat board because I think it shows off the piece nicer and lets the color of the piece really show itself off. So here we go, we're matted now. So this needs to go into the frame. All right, so now we have our frame. You want to undo whatever sort of clips there are for the back of the frame to take the backing out. All right, so you really want to make sure your glass is clean before you place your piece in it. I like to use these lens wipes. These are typically used for cleaning glasses, cleaning lenses on cameras, things like that. Surfaces that it would be really bad if it was scratched. But these are great because they're mostly alcohol based. They get the glass clean, they don't scratch it up, and it dries relatively quickly. So you can just go ahead and give your glass a nice little wipe down here. Make sure it's nice and clean. Get into the corners. And when you're done, you can also do the front. But right now we want to focus on getting the inside clean before we place the piece inside of it. Now you've got your piece, you want to lay that face down into the glass, into the frame. And then before you put the backing on, just flip it over, make sure it's looking good. There's no like a random crud stuck inside the frame with it. Occasionally that happens. And once that's all set, place your backing in, latch it back in place, whatever sort of latching system your frame uses. Sometimes it can be a little tight with the additional backing board in there, putting in your piece. Everything's all put together now. We need to do the wiring. The wiring is really important for gallery shows. You'll see a lot of shows asking you to have your work wired for hanging. It's a lot easier for the people putting the show together if there is a wire on it instead of one of these things. These are really hard to hang from. The wires are a lot easier. And it's a little bit of a pain to put it on, but it makes the life of the gallery operators a lot easier. So you're going to want to have your wire ready, have your brackets ready, your little crimp beads, your screws. You need 2 brackets. And you can use any sort of bracket kit that is appropriate for the weight of your piece. I mean, this only weighs a few pounds. A lot of these wiring kits will hold up to 50 pounds. So chances are you will be fine in terms of weight if it's a smaller piece. So you want to place your brackets somewhere kind of not all the way at the top, but, you know, in the top half of your frame. And, you know, fairly even. So I think I'm going to place mine right around here. It doesn't have to be perfect. This has a fairly thin edge. Some frames are a little thicker and they're a little easier to have room to work with, but I think I'll make this work. So these screws generally should be able to just screw right into the frame without having to drill. Might be a little challenging when you first start to get the hole going, but you should be able to just put these screws in by hand. Sometimes you can like push down on the screw a little bit to make a mark of where you want it to go in so that it stays in place. And use your fingers to hold it as you start to screw it in. You want to really push down as you start screwing in because you're making a hole in the wood with it. So fortunately this wood isn't too hard, so it's going in fairly easily, which is lucky for me. So just want to keep screwing that in. Basically screw this in until it is securely seated and so that the bracket doesn't really move around. Want it tight enough that the bracket stays in place. All right. And then you can do that on the other side, approximately same location on the opposite side. Same thing. Push down a little bit, make a little dent, hold your screw in place. You want to make sure that your screw is going through the bracket. Don't let that get loose. Hold it in place. Screw that right in. Push down to get it going into the wood. You want to make sure it's really straight down. You don't want your screw going super sideways. Mine is trying to do that. Gotta adjust that. Pull it out a little bit. Move it over. Adjust as needed. You do not want sideways screws. You want them straight down into the frame. There we go, and that is securely in place. All right, so now we need to have a piece of wire that can go across here. You want a little bit of slack, but not so much that it goes up over the frame. You want the wire to stay behind the frame when hanging. So, you know, about here looks good. You want a little tail on each end so that you have some space to work with. If you're using these sort of crimp tubes, you might not need as much length. If you don't have the crimp tubes and you're going to be wrapping it to secure it, like wrap it around and around, you probably want a little more length on there. So I'm using these crimp tubes, so I'm going to slide that on, pop that through the bracket, wrap it around, slide it back through the crimp tube. My fingers will let me. There we go. And you want to make sure that pulls through and pull it so that you've got a little bit of a loop hanging onto the bracket, but not too big of a loop. Then you can take your pliers flat on this crimp tube and squeeze. Oops, I got loose. Hold that in place. Squeeze as hard as you can. And that should flatten the tube enough that it's now secure and holding the wire in place. And then I'm going to do the same thing. You want to cut your wire so you have a little tail. I've got a cutter on here, so just cut that wire. There we go. So got my wire here. Put my crimp tube on. All right. String that through the bracket. Pull my crimp tube up. Put the other side through. Pull that through there and tighten up that crimp tube up to the end here. And then use your pliers to squeeze as tight as you can and get that in place. Use those muscles. There we go. And now we've got these little tails hanging off. You don't really want to leave those hanging. They can get caught on things. So go down to the end of the crimp tube as far as you can with the cutters and squeeze and cut that extra piece off like so. Same thing on this side. Close as I can. Cut that off. There we go. And now you've got your wire. You can see it's got a little bit of give, but it still stays behind the frame. So, and it's a lot easier to have this to hang off of. You may also find that you want to do one more wipe of the outside of the glass. And that'll just clean that up a bit. Now it's all wired, it's framed, ready to go, show ready. Hooray! All right, I hope you've enjoyed this video. You can take a look at the post that goes along with this. I will include some links to resources and materials that you might want to buy to make this happen for yourself.